legendary comedian and actor Jerry Seinfeld once said, I saw a study that said the average person's number one fear is speaking in front of crowds. I find that amazing. The number two fear is death. Death is number two. That means that for the average person, if they have to go to a funeral, they'd rather be in the casket than delivering the eulogy. Now, framed in those stark terms, as per Jerry Seinfeld, it is a little difficult to believe, but make no mistake about it, fear of public speaking is a very real thing. And it holds far too many people back from living large and having an even greater impact in their careers, in their lives, and in their communities. So today we're going to be sharing all sorts of advice on how to deal with this widespread boundary that so many people have. Welcome to Power Speaking Live. I am so grateful that you're investing time in this conversation today, and I'm really hopeful that it will leave you empowered and free and a willingness to open up more. I'm Carrie Beckstrom, the host of this monthly series and the CEO of Power Speaking Incorporated. And I'm interested in knowing if our audience today is representative of the average person. So we're going to display a poll for you. And I'd like to share which of these options best reflects your anxiety and fear level when it comes to public speaking. Is it off the charts? Does it vary depending on the situation? Or is it non-existence? Maybe public speaking is your jam. I'll give you a few minutes to respond.
All right, looks like we've got most of our responses here.
Okay. So as you can see, and not surprisingly, the majority of you are right there in the middle. So it's clearly situational. A few of you acknowledged that your level is really, really high. And we also have a small but mighty percentage of folks that are real experts in this area. So my ask is, because we want to make this as interactive as possible, if you were one that was somewhere in the middle, if you'd be willing, please share in chat the types of situations or audiences that tend to cause those nerves to be at a high level. And if you're one of the experts in the room that's really comfortable in these situations, as we go through this conversation, if you have specific advice or insights you'd like to share along with our panelists, I welcome you to do that. You have at your disposal today 3 expert panelists. Joining us is Leanne Davey. Leanne is co-founder and principal of 3Co's. And Leanne, I know you refer to your firm as a small firm with a big vision to radically change the way in which people communicate, connect, and contribute so together they can achieve amazing things. So I would imagine, Leanne, that one of the keys to doing that is helping people to get out of their comfort zone and have the courage to speak up, right?
Yeah, absolutely, Carrie. It's that first one. How do we achieve amazing things if we can't even communicate them? So it's a big part of my life.
Wonderful, wonderful. So you know a thing or two about this topic. Can't wait to dig into it. Yeah, just a little bit. Okay. Also joining us is Mitesh Kapadia. Mitesh is one of Power Speaking's master facilitators and coaches. And Mitesh, one of the many things I value about you is how committed you are to empowering your clients to tap into their confidence and be able to share their truth with their audiences. So I bet you have a lot of inspiring, sage advice to offer our audience today.
Yeah, thank you, Carrie. And that's the worst part is when you have something important to say and it's really your truth, but you're afraid to say it for whatever reason. And that's what I always love to explore with our clients is simply just saying, well, why is that happening? What's going on? And really kind of going down that trail. And we find some amazing things that help people to overcome that. And that's really the key is letting go of that fear and really allowing yourself to share your truth.
Wonderful. Wonderful. It's so empowering when you can accomplish that. And that's rewarding for you as well. And last but not least, we have Janelle Payne. Janelle is also one of Power Speaking's master facilitator and coaches. And Janelle, I know one of your mantras, which I just love, is that improvement doesn't come within your comfort zone. And you also make the very important point that presenting is not about perfection. It's about engagement. And I think that mindset shift is one of the keys to moving from fearful to courageous presenter.
Yeah, I love that, Carrie. Adopting a growth mindset and feeling the discomfort and embracing it and moving through it, I think is really important. And the good news is that when we are uncomfortable, it's a sign to us that we're doing something new or different.
Yeah.
So that's really, it's a really good sign, actually.
Absolutely. I'm trying to remind myself of that quite regularly these days. I just started this week training for a marathon. It's my first one in 5 years. And I keep reminding myself that I need to get comfortable being uncomfortable. That's just the reality of doing this. But at the same time, it's so incredibly rewarding. So let's dig into it by beginning with the end in mind. Leanne, I'd love to start with you. How would you describe a courageous presenter? What does that look like from your perspective?
Oh, cool question. So to me, it's really important to say that courage is not the absence of fear. It's not the absence of anxiety or the absence of discomfort. To me, a courageous presenter, and I think both Mitesh and Janelle have sort of alluded to this in their introductions as well, is somebody who knows that the truth or the message or the connection is so important that it's worth being uncomfortable for. That's somebody courageous. So, once I've been, speaking for a long time, I do it multiple times a week. There's no courage in what I do. Courage to me, what really gets me excited, the people that really cause me to lean in are the people who have a little bit of discomfort, are, anxious, have the butterflies, but they know that the reason that they're communicating or speaking is so important that it's worth going through that to be uncomfortable. When I see somebody courageous like that, you can bet I'm hanging on every word.
Oh my gosh, I love that. And that is so very true. And you're reminding me of a speaker that I saw over a year ago now. And I see a lot of speakers, and she still is embedded in my mind. She was one of the keynote speakers on the first day of a very, very large Women in Tech conference, over 1,000 participants. And I had the honor of introducing her, and I was sitting beside her before I went on stage, and her anxiety I could feel. I mean, it was that high. And so I was just feeling for her. And her talk was very personal. What she did is she shared with the audience her own personal career journey, which had some real lows and some highs. So she was, being really vulnerable and exposing not only her successes, but her missteps. And she never fully overcame that anxiousness. Her body language was kind of closed. The audience was hanging on every word. They were hanging on every word because she was being open, authentic, and giving of herself to help her audience. So I love that. So very true.
Goosebumps as you're telling that story, Carrie.
Oh, it was just incredible. It was really remarkable. So that's what we're aspiring to. We're aspiring to what you just described, Leanne. And as we talked about already, in order to achieve that level of success, it does take a willingness to step out of our comfort zone, to take some risks, which means we'll inevitably stumble along the way. It's not going to be about perfection, like you say, Janelle. So who would be willing to share one of your worst public speaking moments and what you learned from it?
How much time do we have? I'll go. I'll share two stories because the first one segues into the second. So I remember this clear as day. When I was an undergraduate student, I had an oral presentation to deliver, and it was in a lecture hall in front of all my peers. And I had really spent a ton of time scripting the content
And if you were to have just read it, it would have probably been an A. And I never talked it out loud, never piloted it out loud, never heard myself say it. So the morning of, I get into that lecture hall, it's my turn to get up at the podium, right? All eyes on me. Literally froze, just completely blacked out, blanked out, could not access the content for the life of me. And it was humiliating. I mean, I can just call it up so easily today. The instructor was so patient with me, and he was really trying to prompt me, you know, take your time, take a deep breath. Nothing, couldn't get it. I just ended up sitting down. And then fast forward many years later, I went back, I left my my role in television at MTV, and I thought, I want to go back and get my master's. I want to teach interpersonal communication. So I start grad school, and in the second year of my program, I learned that in order to be a graduate teaching associate, I have to teach public speaking for 2 semesters to undergraduate students. And I was like, I am out. Like, no way. This is not what I came here for. But I ended up doing it, and I felt like the biggest imposter ever. And what I realized, the takeaway for me and what I learned from both of these situations, for me, I was really transferring a lot of my performance anxiety from when I danced. I danced for 25 years. And for all of us who have ever played an instrument or performed, or athletes, there's a right way to do it, right? There's a right way to do a pirouette. And if you screw it up, you've done it wrong. And I was carrying that over. And I had that mindset about it being a performance. And that was the breakthrough for me. It's not a performance, it's a conversation. And to reinforce what Leanne, you said, we're here to be helpful to the audience, to share a message, to inspire, to educate. That's what we're there for. So that was a huge learning for me.
And look at you now.
Looking out, now I coach people how to speak. I would have never in a million years, just true introvert as a kid. So this is, would have never thought I would do this ever. And I've been doing it for 15, 16 years now.
Thank you so much for sharing, and a lot of wisdom there. I also gathered that one of your other lessons learned is just one step of the process is to write that great speech. That's just half the battle, right? The other is to spend a heck of a lot of time practicing it literally out loud.
Yeah. And that is a strong recommendation that we make in all of our power speaking classes. And we actually create and facilitate breakouts so that people can try it on. So it's so different when we speak it, and only with that talking it out loud, hearing yourself say it a few different ways and times, you allow yourself the flexibility to improvise, say something you hadn't planned for. And that's truly when we start to build the confidence around our content. And I would suggest also recording yourself and playing it back, listening to yourself in your earbuds, take a walk. You start to really familiarize yourself with your content. And then you have that freedom to improvise a little bit, right? Because the audience doesn't know what you scripted. So it's really critical to move beyond the script.
Absolutely. And that's also, I think, when you get the most joy and gratification out of the experience, because you can be in the moment and really engage with your audience. Natalie says, that so resonates with me, Janelle. I'm a singer, and yet I sometimes choke speaking to large groups. So yeah, completely identifies. I'm just checking to see if a few people shared the types of situations they find more the most nerve-wracking. The more people I know in the audience, the harder it is. Do they believe I know what I'm talking about? That is so true for so many of us. It's actually easier to speak to strangers than people we know very well, which is one of the reasons your story, Janelle, was so painful to hear, because that's extra hard. You're in front of all of your peers, the other students. Another, Natalie says, for me, the level of leaders in the audience and knowing my subject. And Sharon shared, I need to know my subject very well or I am nervous. Yeah, very, very true. Okay, so let's get underneath this in terms of what really is causing that fear and anxiety. And I have to underscore the point you made, Leanne. This isn't about overcoming that fear. In fact, a little anxiety can be channeled very productively, and it suggests that you care, right? If you don't have any anxiety at all, that might put into question, are you really passionate about what you're going to be discussing?
We've all seen those speakers, right? We're like, oh, a little bit more, a little bit more something.
They're on autopilot right now. Yeah. So, Mitesh, you have so much experience in this. Would you share a little bit about the factors underneath what's really causing that fear, and advice you have for managing that productively?
Yeah, thank you, Carrie. And one of the things, the number one thing I find is similar to what Janelle said, is that when you make it about yourself, to make it a performance. And that's where people find themselves blocked and stuck, is when they start focusing on all the things that they need to do to meet a certain standard that they have in their head. Mm-hmm. And when you get caught up in that, it's a never-ending uphill journey to match some sort of standard that you've created for yourself. And so my biggest advice for people is get into the act of service. When you put your attention back onto your audience, it's so much more easier to say, hey, here's how I can help you, versus here's how I can be perfect in front of you today. And it's just that shift that you make of, once you get into that act of service, like, hey, I know you have something that you're looking from me for, and here I am, I'm going to go deliver it for you. Just think about it. When somebody asks you for help, you're not thinking about, can I help this person? Or, am I qualified to help this person? Or do I have the skill sets to help? You just say, sure, I can. How can I help you? And you start to explore, you start to figure out if there is a possibility of helping. And at some point, maybe there isn't, but similar to speaking is that, people are there to learn from you. They want to know from you. And you wouldn't be in that position if you weren't the right person to be there. And so really, the key here is putting that attention back on the audience, and in that act of service is where that truly allows you to open up and be authentic in front of your audience.
Wonderful. Wonderful. I read an article recently that the headline or main message was, learn to be a more generous presenter. And because again, it naturally, and there's something actually happening within the brain that helps that anxiety to come down when you're in the spirit of service, as you said, Mitesh. And oftentimes speakers who have a high level of fear and anxiety almost try to avoid real, true eye contact. They kind of look over the audience, and actually making that connection with individual connection with people in the spirit of service that in and of itself help you to feel more comfortable and relaxed. So thank you. That's such great advice. So let's transition from what's causing this to solutions for managing it productively. And I'd like to talk about this through the lens of a model that we use in many of our workshops. And it talks about mastering the skill of presenting through three components: substance, style, and staging. So starting with substance, which of course is your actual content, what worries people about coming up with their content? And Janelle, what advice do you have for helping people to find this process to be more accessible and just easier to do?
Yeah. Mitesh and I both coach a lot of subject matter experts, and a theme that emerges again and again, right? Week after week, year after year, people come into coaching and they say, I've been given feedback that I get into the weeds. I know so much about my content. I'm overwhelming my audience with it. I don't have a clear message, or maybe sometimes not even a clear call to action. So there's so many other things. Also, we hear a lot of people that are very concerned about their slides, right? I created this deck. Is it too much? Is it too little? So, and I could go on, but I want to address those two things. So when you know so much about your content, it can be really challenging to prioritize what content needs to go into this talk. And to come back to what Mitesh said, if we are adopting an audience-centric mindset, which is really what we coach people to do, then we're putting ourselves in their shoes. We're becoming empathic. We're asking the question, okay, who's in the room? What do they expect? What do they need? What are their questions that they're bringing in of concern or curiosity? What skepticism and resistance? And we really have people go through some thinking, some strategic preparation around being audience-centric. And I often tell people, think like a journalist. What, why, when, where, how? Those are the kinds of questions that are top of mind for your audience. And if we can create our content and prioritize the key points, for example, based on what we anticipate the audience wanting to know, then we're going to be able to figure out more clearly and more efficiently what content stays into this. And in our presentation skills class, we coach people to first start with the end in mind, right? That was your first question to Leanne, and that is identify what the call to action is. What do you want your audience to think, feel, or do as a result of this meeting? Because if there isn't a call to action, why are we calling people together for yet another meeting, right? It could be an email. So I think some of these strategies are incredibly not only useful, but versatile, because it also helps us gather our thoughts when we have so much we could share and write an email that's concise. But I think one of the areas for development people again and again come into coaching with, into classes, hey, I want to be more concise. I want to build my brevity muscle. How do I do it when I know so much about my content? And to circle back to the slide issue, a lot of times people, and we've all done this, I mean, I know I have. So a lot of times people are not creating the presentation, the story first. They're creating the slide deck. They're inheriting the deck. They're repurposing it. And I think that is one of the biggest mistakes people make, because it's very overwhelming to you as a speaker to try to share all that, and then also for the audience. So I think there is a place for slides, but it's not the first place. I think using the framework and the presentation plan that we coach people to use really clarifies the call to action and then the message that drives people to take that action. And that helps us stay out of the weeds. And so I could say more, but I'll stop there. But I think that's one of the themes that I hear all the time.
Wonderful. Such great advice. Jane is sharing, I build a story, then backtrack to the slides. I also try to avoid too many words on a slide. Then you have more flexibility to adapt to the audience. Spot on, Jane, spot on. Yeah, we call too many words on a slide kind of like vomit on a slide. You have to remember at all times that the audience is there to see you, not your slide deck, and they're just there to punctuate things you have to say, not repeat what you're going to say. So thank you so much for sharing that, Jane. And again, I love this. In the audience, if you have questions or advice you'd like to share, please feel free to put it in chat. So let's segue to the other component of our model, which is style, and it's all about delivery. And for many people, this is a little bit uncomfortable, and it's part of what contributes to that anxiety, and in some cases causing people to feel somewhat paralyzed, not knowing, what do I do with my hands? How do I effectively modulate my voice? I can't possibly imagine getting out from behind this podium and walking around the space that I have. And Leanne, seeing you in action many times, I have to say, one of your many strengths as a presenter is you are so animated. So I know you do this very, very well. So what advice do you have for folks to help them get comfortable in their skin and just own that moment?
Yeah, so it just requires making incrementally bigger and bigger and bigger choices. And what you'll find is you get rewarded for it. So that's what's interesting for me. So when I first started learning how to speak, the coach that I was working with made me stand in the room, just he and I, with my arms out like this for 2 minutes. And that nearly killed me. I felt so exposed. I felt so vulnerable. And literally, I was just standing with my arms out in a private room for 2 minutes. And then what he would do is he would videotape me talking and make me watch the entire talk with the sound off. And it is such a great exercise because you start to see like, why am I moving my hands, but my elbows are connected to my body? And what is that telegraphing to the audience? And you start to become aware of, because when you have to listen to your speech or watch your speech with no sound, you ask, what is my body telling the audience? And then you listen a second time with the sound and you say, what are my words telling the audience? And where are they incongruent? And how could my body tell the same story as my words? So all I did is I'm like, okay, this talk, I'm not going to have my elbows connected. I'm going to have them surgically severed so that they're no longer like, I'm like, air, look at that. And then every time I made a slightly bigger choice, I would see more smiles in the audience. More people would stand beside the stage to come up to me after. I got so much reinforcement for it. And then at one point I was giving this speech. I think there were 2,000 people in the room. And I tell this story in my talk about rowers. And I'm kind of complaining about those teamwork posters with the rowers. And I just in the moment made this choice to like bend over, stick my bottom way out and like do this in front of the audience, turn sideways for maximum effect. And my peripheral vision caught my bottom on the 30-foot high screen. And it was just such an important moment for me because the audience is killing themselves laughing. They're loving every minute of it. And I just stopped and turned to them and said, never underestimate my willingness to embarrass myself for your benefit. And that was the moment I realized that if I go back to what Mitesh said, if I am serving them, my talks are about conflict and the importance of conflict. And so talking about something very uncomfortable, very awkward, and somehow if I can show them that I can look, Hannah Pryor has a new book coming out called Good Awkward. Everybody check it out. If speaking is an issue for you, check out Good Awkward. If I could be good awkward for them, it would serve them. It would open them to these messages that I know they need to hear. So it's just, I would say, if you can get it, like just put your phone on the front table and record it, but force yourself to go through it without even listening, just watching, and just ask yourself, what story is my body telling? And if it's telling the wrong story, unfortunately, the way the human brain works, they'll believe what your body's telling them much more than they will believe what you're telling them with your words. So make those huge choices, but start small. It's okay.
That's such great advice. And we're getting a lot of reactions to that. I love that. No sound. I'm going to try it.
Yeah, try it, Sharon. It's and you know, just send me an email for moral support because it's excruciatingly painful, but we got you. Let us know if we got your back.
Excellent. And so we're getting some great phrases here. Learn to be a more generous speaker and good awkward. Get comfortable with good awkward. The other thing I really liked that you pointed out, Leanne, is your willingness to engage in some self-deprecation, which is such an easy way to make yourself accessible and authentic. Love it. Okay. Mitesh, Janelle, anything else you wanted to add on the subject of style?
Just to reinforce that that's such a fabulous exercise. And I think it gives us some cognitive dissonance too, because we're seeing ourselves through the lens of the audience, and the feel versus real is very, it provides a lot of self-awareness for some people, right? They might be concerned that they look like a train wreck, and then they see it and they're like, oh, it ain't so bad. Like, I'm not broadcasting my nerves through, behaviors that are distracting. And then the opposite's true. Some people are like, I'm good, and then they watch themselves and they're like, I'm dancing up there, I'm swaying or whatever it is. So I think it's very illuminating. And yes, it's uncomfortable, and step into the discomfort, because that really helps you figure out like, what is the specific behavior that I'm doing that's distracting from my message? And what am I doing really well so I can keep leveraging that every time I speak? I love that exercise. It's fabulous.
It's great. And Leanne, we call this T-Rex arms, where your elbows seem glued to your side. No one wants T-Rex arms. up there. So let's get to the last component, staging. Mitesh, you've already provided some wonderful advice on how to keep those nerves in check. Let's talk about some other recommendations you have. So let's just assume it's the moment before you're going to get on that stage, the moment before you're going to walk into that boardroom, the moment before you're delivering your talk to your fellow graduate students. What advice do you have for calming the nerves in that moment?
Yeah. So one of the biggest things I recommend for people is that in that moment, don't let it be the first time that you're experiencing this. And I mean, there's so many different types of stages that you can be on now. You can be on a physical stage in front of an audience. You can be in a boardroom. You can be in a virtual setting. You can be in a hybrid setting. And all of these, and what I mean by hybrid is that, you might have folks that are remotely logged in, and then you're actually in the room with some participants. So the dynamics are wide and many. And the key thing here is, if you are doing it for the first time, because the unknown always scares people. So if you've had an opportunity to test it out, to at least see the stage, some of the most renowned speakers, they will, the day before or some time before they actually present or they speak, will go to the stage, check it out, see what's there, see what the technology is there. Even for this session that we're doing here today, you can just see all the support that we have available to us. I mean, you can just look at the participant list and you'll see a whole bunch of co-hosts. And that's not there by accident. It's simply there as a support team to help you, because you're not going to have it all figured out the day of if you just assume that, hey, I'm going to go present and I'm going to just wow the crowd. But it's just that ability to make sure that you've done this before, or that you've had some level of practice before, because when you build that muscle memory for yourself, then you'll be a little bit more at ease. You may not be completely free from your anxiety, but at least you'll be somewhat comfortable in saying, all right, I've run through this, I've seen some of this. And the biggest thing that people don't do is that to own up to something that if it is a mistake. So, I mean, I've had many instances actually where the microphone would stop working, or there would be, something that happens in the audience, or there's a sound that happens that trips people up. Just own it and roll with it and acknowledge it, rather than trying to fix it in a way. And when you take just that ability to pause and take a breath, there's a lot of good that happens after that breath of just saying, oh, okay, just calling it out and acknowledging that something happened, versus you just going right through it and ignoring it and saying, maybe nobody heard that, or nobody saw that, or maybe nobody felt that. And that's the key here, is just allowing yourself to be present, because the stage is really your environment in which you reside in, whether it's your home, whether it's your stage, whether it's wherever you are, it's the environment. And the more you're comfortable in that environment, the easier it becomes to shine. And so that's the biggest thing, is first off, don't let it be the first time that you're doing this. So practice, have some dry run. And then secondly, acknowledge something if it does go wrong, because things will go wrong. And that's just a part of it.
Yeah. That great advice, Mitesh. And acknowledging when things do go wrong, it makes you appear more confident. If you try to ignore it or overlook it, it's not like you're being in the moment and being real. The other thing that I always recommend, because typically you're most nervous at that very beginning. And once you get going, get into your groove, you tend to calm down a bit, especially if you're engaging with your audience. So I always say, have that opening down pat, know it in and out. So it's committed, like you said, Mitesh, to muscle memory. We have a question from Sharon Bartlett. She says, I say and a lot, so those non-words, trying so hard to stop it. Any advice?
I would simply say, one of the things is the reason why ums happen is just that we're not comfortable with the silence. And building that level of comfort by just taking a breath in, giving yourself a chance to pause, or even, having a drink or taking a sip in the middle of you actually speaking is going to help reduce some of those ums. Because when you take a breath in, you can't make a sound. And that is one thing I find is helpful. And then just the idea of knowing that this pause is going to be helpful for you. Pausing and taking a breath is probably the best remedy for that. Because if you try to work through that discomfort of just by making a sound, it's going to create more issues and more problems. And I always say that, a few ums are okay, but if it becomes a distraction, that's when you need to do some work on it. So don't beat yourself up either if it's just a couple of ums here or there. That's okay. It happens, but just notice if it becomes a distraction.
Absolutely. I also think it's really helpful. This is where watching yourself, watching recording of yourself and just becoming more aware to detect when you tend to use them the most, when those non-words slip in. So for example, for a lot of people, it's during transitions. So if that's where you're struggling the most when you're preparing, be much more intentional about what those transition statements are going to be, so they're replaced with something meaningful versus something that doesn't add any value. Getting comfortable with pauses. Oftentimes it's because people haven't practiced enough and they don't have full command, right, of their content, and therefore a lot of ums are creeping in. So understanding when you do it the most can help you overcome them. Thank you for that question. And we also have Lonnie. For those of us who like to talk in depth, what is a good trick to make sure a person gets back on track to the main topic during Q&A? I don't know why you would ask that question, Lonnie. I've never seen you have any challenge with that. Any advice?
I'll take that, Lonnie. So one strategy that we coach folks on when responding to questions is to bookend your answer. Have a headline beginning and reinforce that same message at the end. That is one model that we use. It's called PrEP. And it's really nice as either a subject matter expert or somebody. I mean, we can all be verbose, but it's really nice to know, how do I start this response? How do I start the answer? And how do I finish it? Because for most of us, the problem isn't answering the question. We know a lot. The problem is stopping answering the question. So under talking and having the bookends, I think that model is very helpful.
If we go back to the service concept, because this is one that's really hard for me, Lonnie, so I'm right with you on this one. I do tend to go on too long in my answers. So if we go back to service, if I'm doing a talk and there's 10 questions and I spend all the Q&A answering the first one, there's 9 people who I wasn't able to serve at all. So I try and remember that I'm trying to serve as many of the 10 as I possibly can. And then what I often do is I often go back and on LinkedIn or in some other forum, I'll answer the questions in more depth. I did have one recently where somebody asked me a question. I gave them an answer, but tried to keep it nice and tight. But then I thought about it on the plane on the way home and wrote a blog and said, here's a better answer. So if you're trying to serve more people, then spending all the time giving an exhaustive answer to one question doesn't do that.
Wonderful. There's so much value to having that audience-centric mindset. It comes to play in so many ways when you're presenting and facilitating. So thank you. I'm sure that helped you, Lonnie. Yes, he said great advice. So I have a few more questions I'd love to slip in before we give you each the chance to share your parting advice. Mitesh, I know you've had the benefit of coaching and training people all over the world. When it comes to fear of public speaking and presenting, what cultural differences have you encountered, and what advice do you have on that regard?
Well, I think the biggest thing across any culture is that people tend to compare themselves with others. So whether you are not if you're a non-native English speaker, you'll compare yourself to those who are good, or have English as their first language. Or if you are, even simple things like if you're short or tall, or if you're a man, a man or a woman, or whatever, you start comparing. And when you make those comparisons across cultures, there's going to be differences. And it's in those comparisons that we start to judge ourselves. And when we judge ourselves, that's when that downhill train goes of like, you get so focused on what are your shortcomings, or what are your problems, or what are the things that you don't have that other people have. And so it's in that comparison that I find that is the general theme across cultures. And so what I recommend is that when you are able to just come back to yourself, and acknowledge your strengths, acknowledge who you are, and find that you have a lot to offer, then it gets you out of that self-deprecation mode. And then you can truly, come back to that act of service. And so globally, different cultures, there are things that, you can do to specifically think that, hand gestures and things that might be offensive in some cultures versus other cultures. But ultimately it comes down to just coming back to your truth and being, and you probably hear my dog in the background, but there is a construction vehicle out there somewhere. So just similar to that staging element, just acknowledge, hey, things are going on here today that are out of my control. But nevertheless, to come back to that is, like, across cultures, the fear is just when we look at ourselves in a negative way, and coming back to ourselves and looking at ourselves in an empowering way will help to remove anything across any culture, or wherever you speak, whether you speak in the Middle East or in Asia or South America, wherever you are. When you stand in your truth, when you stand in your confidence, it's going to show regardless of if you know the language or not.
Beautifully said. Beautifully said. Be your authentic self. All right, let's take one more and then we'll close with the parting advice. One of the things that many people find, I'm one of them, really daunting and difficult to do is to be a compelling presenter when you're merely speaking to a camera. So you don't have the benefit of seeing your audience and adjusting based on the reactions that you're getting. Janelle, I know you've coached a lot of students on this in particular. Real quickly, what advice do you have on that?
Yeah, over the last 2 years, I've coached students for pre-recorded keynotes, think TED Talks, and a lot of conference speakers where the conference has shifted from having that ability to be live in the room and feel the chi and get the reciprocity from the audience and read the feedback and adjust. And so with post-COVID, right, or during COVID, everything shifted to a pre-recorded session. And so I think people are compelled to, well, let me back up for a minute, because I had this experience very recently where I delivered a webinar, and I did it twice. And the first one was a pre-record with nobody, no one to interact with. And the second one was live, like we are today. I was astounded by how much adrenaline I experienced during the recording. And I think part of it is that we know it's going to live in infamy, right? It's going to go on. It's like our legacy is going to be recorded. So we feel compelled to have, again, like the perfect opening. And so my suggestion, and Carrie, you already said this, so I want to double down on it. Know your opening inside and out, commit to it, be able to say it forwards and backwards, because at that very beginning, when the session gets recorded, you're going to feel like you want to get it perfect because it's going to live on. And it's not a time to wing it. It's not a time to figure it out in the moment. Have that opening down pat. And again, try it on, say it out loud a lot of different times, and know that the audience doesn't know what you have planned to say. A lot of times in these recorded sessions, they can be edited and cleaned up a little bit, but I have seen firsthand students, all people, I saw one particular instance of somebody having not committed to their opening. And so the day of the recording, they were trying to figure it out in the moment, and it was painful to watch. So having that opening, and I would also say that that's when we feel most nervous, is the opening, as Carrie said. So what can you do in the opening that feels really good in your soul, whether it is something that is personal to you, whether it's an anecdote or a story you could tell that's inspiring, a hobby that you like, something where you feel very much alive, so that you're also relatable in the opening and it feels like something that's easy to talk about. So I think it needs to be relatable and relevant, and you need to know it very, very well.
Right. And feels good in your soul. Excellent, excellent advice. So this has been such a rich conversation. I'd love to leave by sharing with our audience some parting advice. Let's lead off with you, Leanne. If our wonderful audience remembers nothing else from this talk, what would you like to leave them with?
I guess the most important thing from my perspective, the things we've covered, like putting service first, to me that's the most important message of today. But I would say, along with that, stop trying to sound smart. There is nothing more off-putting than listening to somebody who you can tell is trying to, like, if you hear the word methodology, they're trying to sound smart. Because most of us don't do methodology at all. That's the study of scientific methods. Most of us just have a method. And when we use these words, first of all, if I hear someone say methodology, my judgment is going to go in the opposite direction. Not that they're like schwanky and impressive, but like, oh, isn't that funny? They're using a word that they clearly don't even understand. So when you try and sound smart, you increase the distance between you and the audience. And that's the exact opposite of what you're trying to do. So, all the advice that Janelle and Mitesh are giving you is about enhancing the connection, making that eye contact, being authentic, being centered in your truth. It's about increasing that connection, because people are going to take action based on people and messages they connect with. So stop trying to sound smart, please. And then, you know what? When you stop trying to sound smart, you get over that feeling that I need to know everything. I need to have everything prepared. Sometimes you just come in and you say, this is the perspective I'm going to share this from, because that's what I know. I'm keen to learn from you about other perspectives I don't understand yet. And when you do that, a lot of that pressure comes off of you. So I think we're going to share the link. I wrote an article for Harvard Business Review about what you can do instead of trying to sound smart. So we can share that with everyone.
Wonderful. And our producer extraordinaire already dropped it in chat. So yeah, take a read. It's an excellent read. Another resource that I'd recommend, and it sounds like the opposite of what you're saying, Leanne, but it's actually exactly what you're getting at. It's called Smart Brevity. And we just read that as in our Power Speaking book club. And it's about how to be concise and how to use language that's accessible and connects versus being off-putting. Terrific. So Mitesh, what's your parting advice?
Yeah, well, this is advice that I kind of knew, but then I heard it from a mentor, and it's really connection before correction. And what this means is that, the idea of trust. If you're trying to influence in your organization, or if you're trying to influence your audience, people will only listen to who they trust. And unless you've built that before, you can't create any change or create actionable things that they'll apply to their own lives without that connection first. And so I always put that out there first, is seek that connection. And Leanne talked about it earlier, just in her parting words as well, is that idea of connection. So really just want to piggyback on that and say that without that, there is no trust. And without that trust, there is no ability for your audience to take the action that you want them to take.
Wonderful. And Janelle?
Yes. So I'm going to pull this book off my shelf. Those of you who have kids or nieces or nephews, you might know this one. And it's one of my kids' favorite. We're going on a bear hunt. And the message behind this book is that this family has to trudge through the mud to get to the other side. They have to get through the river. They have to go through a sandstorm. And every single page and every single challenge says, you can't go over it. You can't go under it. You have to go through it. And that's that discomfort, right? Stepping into the discomfort, knowing that when you're taking that risk and you're feeling uncomfortable, that is a move of courageousness. And so you're, try to not think about getting to the other side of it, but to Mitesh's point, like, be in the moment and be present so that you can connect and make the eye contact and read the feedback from the audience and make the connection. So you got to go through it. And
love it. And Leanne added, squelch, squirch, squelch, squirch. Just go through it. Yeah.
That was a favorite in our house as well, that exact version of the book. And given that I work on the importance of conflict, We're Going on a Bear Hunt is a great one for that as well. When it's uncomfortable, you can't go over it. You can't go under it. You got to go through it.
That's right. Oh, that's right. All right. So this has been packed with such sage advice and resource recommendations. So thank you so much, Leanne, Mitesh, Janelle. This has been a terrific conversation, and I hope it's been freeing and empowering to our audience. Thank you as well for all of you who have joined. We're getting some great feedback in chat. And before you drop, we would love if you could put in chat other topics that you'd like us to cover in future live events. And on that note, we're going to close by giving a preview of our topic for our July live event, which is all about strategies and techniques that are most essential to succeed when presenting to key decision makers. So I hope you can join us, and thank you again. This has just been a wonderful, robust conversation.